On the cold morning of June 22, 1559, the royal courts of France and Spain trembled with anticipation as the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis prepared to end nearly 60 years of brutal conflict between two of Europe's greatest powers. Yet buried beneath the political triumph was the fate of a child standing at the heart of an agreement crafted by men who saw her not as a daughter, not as a girl, but as a bargaining piece whose body and future were tools of diplomacy. That child was 14-year-old Isabel de Valois, the youngest daughter of King Henry II of France and Catherine de Medici, destined to be married to Philip II of Spain, a man 22 years her senior and already marked by illness, grief, and a temperament hardened by war, loss, and religious conflict. It was a union celebrated by diplomats, chroniclers, and rulers across Europe, yet for Isabel it marked the beginning of a life shaped by duty, sacrifice, and the crushing weight of monarchy where personal desires were irrelevant and suffering became inseparable from queenship. To understand Isabel's tragedy, one must look first at the crumbling political landscape that shaped her childhood. The long-standing rivalry between the French Valois and the Spanish Habsburgs had drained national treasuries, destroyed entire provinces, and left tens of thousands dead from Italy to the Low Countries. France, though culturally powerful, was weakened financially and militarily after years of war. Spain stood as a dominant global empire with vast wealth from the Americas, yet faced endless battles in Europe and the Mediterranean that demanded unity and peace. Both crowns needed stability, and marriage had always been the favored solution for monarchs desperate to end cycles of destruction. Isabel, barely a teenager, became the embodiment of that solution. Born in April 1546, Isabel grew up in a court defined by elegance and intrigue. Her mother, Catherine de Medici, one of the most politically astute women of the century, understood better than anyone that children of royalty were never their own. Education for a princess like Isabel focused on languages, music, diplomacy, and devotion, molding her into a symbol of refinement intended for display on an international stage. Her upbringing was carefully supervised, her behavior monitored, her health observed, and her future negotiated long before she was old enough to understand it. European ambassadors frequently commented on her intelligence, grace, and gentle temperament, describing her as one of the most promising young princesses of her generation. But Isabel's promising future collided with a sudden tragedy in 1559. King Henry II died unexpectedly from a fatal jousting wound, leaving France politically vulnerable and Catherine in a frantic struggle to protect her children and the stability of the Valois dynasty. The treaty, already in motion, required that Isabel be married to King Philip II as part of the peace arrangements. Though Catherine had initially hoped to marry Isabel to a younger royal or keep her in France as a political tool, she had no choice once the treaty terms were cemented. France could not afford to provoke Spain again, nor could it risk losing the fragile peace that had cost so many lives. Philip II of Spain, nearly 40 years old when Isabel arrived, was a man shaped by sorrow and illness. He had already been married twice, losing both wives, Maria Manuela of Portugal, who died shortly after childbirth, and Queen Mary I of England, whose death shattered his hope of uniting England and Spain under a Catholic empire. Chronic gout, fevers, and digestive disorders plagued him, and he possessed a melancholic, rigid personality. Yet politically he was unmatched in power. He ruled over Spain, the Netherlands, Milan, Naples, Sicily, and vast territories in the New World. His marriage to Isabel was not merely a union of two individuals, but a symbolic bridge linking two empires with shared Catholic ideals. When Isabel first learned of her marriage, contemporary accounts describe her as tearful and confused. She had expected a future in France or perhaps a marriage closer to her age, yet the reality of dynastic responsibility eliminated personal hope. Her mother tried to comfort her, reminding her that royal daughters were born to serve their countries. The French court, meanwhile, celebrated the marriage as a diplomatic victory, ignoring or dismissing Isabel's fear and youth. Paintings and letters from the period portray her as calm and dignified, but behind these images was a girl forced to mature rapidly under the pressure of international politics. The journey to Spain was long and ceremonial. Isabel traveled with a lavish entourage, escorted by both French and Spanish nobles. Crowds gathered in cities along the route to witness the young princess whose marriage promised continental peace. Chroniclers describe her as strikingly beautiful, with dark eyes, refined features, and an elegance beyond her years. Her clothing, jewelry, and the standards of the Valois court projected the power of France, even as she left it behind. Each step toward Spain marked a departure from her childhood, her language, and her identity. Philip awaited her at Guadalajara, and witnesses recorded his fascination with her grace and youth. Yet beneath the formal admiration lay an undeniable tragedy. Isabel, still in the early years of adolescence, was now the wife of a monarch far older and burdened by illness. She entered a Spanish court known for its rigidity, its religious intensity, and its strict discipline. The shift from the vibrant French environment to the solemn Spanish palace at Madrid was drastic. Everything in Spain was governed by protocol, silence, and order. Isabel, a child raised in a French culture rich with color and conversation, now found herself living within walls defined by austerity and ceremonial restraint. Still, Isabel adapted quickly. Her intelligence, warmth, and sincere nature softened the atmosphere of the Spanish court. Even Philip, known for his cold and distant manner, grew deeply attached to her. Far from being a political pawn devoid of agency, Isabel soon became a central emotional figure in Philip's life. She served as a companion, as a symbol of peace, and eventually as a mother whose daughters would influence future alliances across Europe. But her youth and responsibilities took a toll. The burden of queenship, childbirth at a young age, and the pressure of maintaining diplomatic harmony created immense strain. Isabel's tragedy was not sensational or scandalous. It was the quiet suffering of a girl forced into a woman's world where duty overshadowed every personal desire. Her life, though brief, left an enduring mark on the Spanish monarchy. When Isabel de Valois arrived in Spain in early 1560, she crossed not only a geographical frontier, but an emotional and political boundary far more demanding than any child could truly comprehend. The vibrant elegance of the French Valois court, filled with music, color, and conversation, suddenly gave way to the rigid gravity of the Spanish Habsburg monarchy. The Spanish court functioned like a slow-moving machine built on silence, ritual, and religious solemnity. Every movement, every gesture, every sentence spoken by the new queen was watched, judged, and interpreted as a signal of alliance or disrespect. Isabel had been trained for diplomacy, yet she was still only 14, trying to survive in a world ruled by men decades older and far more experienced than she was. Despite her youth, Isabel quickly became beloved among the Spanish people. Her French manners, light-hearted charm, and natural tenderness softened the traditionally austere court. Observers commented on her intelligence and her ability to learn Spanish customs with remarkable speed. She adapted her wardrobe, her posture, and even the cadence of her speech to align with the expectations of her new subjects. But beneath the graceful surface lay a deeper tension. Isabel was expected to give Philip an heir and strengthen the fragile peace between France and Spain. Her marriage was not built on personal connection, but on political necessity, and every aspect of her existence was shaped by the pressure to secure dynastic stability. Philip II, nearly 40 at the time of their marriage, found solace in Isabel's youthful warmth, yet his health was deteriorating. Chronic gout caused him unbearable pain, forcing him into long periods of seclusion. His rigid daily schedule, already influenced by melancholic tendencies, grew even stricter as his physical discomfort increased. He often retreated into solitude, leaving Isabel alone in a palace filled with advisers, priests, and nobility who viewed her as both a foreigner and a symbol of fragile peace. She was surrounded, yet isolated, respected yet controlled, admired yet constantly scrutinized. The political situation around her made the burden even heavier. France was unraveling after the death of Henry II. Her brother Francis II died only a year after her departure, plunging France into deeper crisis. The Valois monarchy was fractured by internal tensions. The powerful Guise family, fierce defenders of Catholic power, clashed with Protestant nobles inspired by the Reformation. The growing conflict between Catholics and Huguenots sparked the beginning of the French Wars of Religion. Bloodshed erupted in multiple regions, and the kingdom Isabel had been born in, too, was rapidly collapsing into sectarian violence. As reports reached Spain, Isabel lived with the painful knowledge that she could not help her mother or siblings, nor defend her homeland from the descent into chaos. Catherine de Medici wrote frequently to her daughter, describing the fragile condition of France and the pressures she herself faced as regent. These letters were filled with political updates, emotional appeals, and subtle instructions on how Isabel should conduct herself as Queen of Spain. Catherine relied on her daughter to maintain a stable relationship with Philip, hoping this royal connection would protect France during its darkest years. Isabel became not only a queen but a diplomatic bridge, a living embodiment of peace between two powers now facing internal and external threats. Meanwhile, within Spain itself, tensions were rising in the Netherlands, where Philip's authoritarian approach sparked resentment and rebellion. Advisers pressed him to act decisively. The pressure of ruling a vast empire depended heavily on political stability at home, and many expected Isabel, despite her youth, to soften diplomatic relations and help maintain unity. She was drawn into political discussions far beyond her age. Ambassadors from Italy, Portugal, England, and the German states frequently sought her attention, hoping to influence Philip through her. She responded with the tact and dignity expected of a queen, but the emotional toll was immense. Philip's illnesses, both physical and emotional, intensified the pressure on his young wife. His intermittent fevers, digestive problems, and frequent bouts of gout created long stretches during which Isabel served as the primary public face of the monarchy. She participated in ceremonies, greeted diplomats, attended religious events, and attempted to maintain a sense of normalcy within the court. Yet despite her increasing responsibilities, she was treated with strict formality. She had limited freedom of movement, lived under constant surveillance, and was expected to follow the rigid etiquette of the Spanish household. But Isabel possessed a rare emotional intelligence. She learned quickly how to navigate the strict hierarchy of ladies-in-waiting, courtiers, advisers, and clergy. Her kindness and gentle manner gained her allies even among those who initially disliked her foreign background. People described her presence as luminous and calming, a contrast to the heavy atmosphere of the Escorial Palace and the intense solemnity that Philip favored. Still, the question of an heir overshadowed everything. Isabel became pregnant, giving the crown hope for a future heir who would unite French and Spanish bloodlines. But her first two pregnancies ended in the birth of daughters, not sons. Though Philip adored them, political figures expressed disappointment. The pressure on Isabel increased. Court physicians monitored her health constantly. Nobles whispered about the need for a male successor. Religious advisers prayed for divine intervention. Isabel, still barely in her mid-teens, faced expectations that weighed heavily on her already fragile emotional state. As France spiraled into deeper violence, Isabel's role became even more symbolic. She represented the hope that peace could endure through dynastic connection. Her marriage to Philip no longer served only as a gesture of reconciliation, but as a strategic necessity holding two volatile kingdoms together. Yet the stress on the young queen grew unbearable. The deaths of her father, her brother Francis, and various members of her family left her emotionally wounded. She longed to return to France, even for a short visit, but the political dangers made travel impossible. All she could do was receive letters describing the horrors of the French religious wars, the massacres, the shifting alliances, and the danger her mother faced daily. Philip, though devoted to her, remained occupied with the management of revolts in the Netherlands, diplomatic conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, and rising tensions with England. The couple spent long periods apart, separated by political necessity and Philip's frequent travels. Isabel's loneliness grew even as her public role expanded. By the late 1560s, Isabel had become a beloved figure in Spain, yet her health began to deteriorate under the strain of repeated pregnancies, emotional pressure, and the demands of court life. The weight of two kingdoms rested on her shoulders, and the tragedy of her youth became more apparent with each passing year. Her story moved from one of forced marriage to one of quiet suffering and duty, shaped by forces far beyond her control. By the mid-1560s, Isabel de Valois stood at the center of one of the most powerful empires in the world, yet the cost of her position had grown dangerously high. The gentle 14-year-old who had left France as a diplomatic offering had transformed into a poised young queen admired throughout Spain, but every year brought new pressures, new losses, and new expectations. Her marriage, once a symbol of peace between two rival kingdoms, now became the fragile foundation upon which Philip II relied, as Spain entered a decade of intense political turmoil. Isabel's youth had been sacrificed long before, but now her health and emotional endurance were being tested in ways that would shift the trajectory of her life toward a tragic end. The turning point began with a difficult balance of personal and political responsibilities. Isabel had already given birth to two daughters, Isabel Clara Eugenia in 1566 and Catalina Michaela in 1567. These children, though deeply loved by both parents, intensified the political strain surrounding the royal family. Spanish nobles quietly murmured that the kingdom needed a male heir to secure the succession. The memory of past dynastic conflicts haunted the court. Powerful advisers feared that Philip's only son from his previous marriage, Don Carlos, troubled by severe mental instability, could not be relied upon to rule. The pressure for the young queen to bear a healthy male child grew heavier with every passing month. Yet Isabel was not physically strong. Contemporary accounts describe her as delicate, prone to exhaustion, and vulnerable to sudden fevers. The demands placed upon her body were immense. Pregnancy followed pregnancy with little time for recovery. The strict rituals of the Spanish court offered no flexibility. Even during illness, she was expected to appear at ceremonies, attend daily religious observances, and participate in political receptions where ambassadors scrutinized her every gesture for clues about Spanish intentions. At the same time, events far beyond her control tightened around her life. In the Netherlands, Philip's hardline policies sparked outright rebellion. Cities erupted in violence. Spanish troops clashed with Protestant forces determined to resist royal authority. The Habsburg Empire stretched across continents, and Philip struggled to manage crises in multiple regions. His frequent absences left Isabel not only as queen, but as an essential face of calm and continuity. She presided over councils, met foreign envoys, and served as a stabilizing figure for both the monarchy and the Spanish people. Her quiet strength earned her admiration, but the emotional toll deepened the cracks forming within her health. Meanwhile, France continued to crumble. The French Wars of Religion became one of the most brutal civil conflicts in European history. Massacres, betrayals, and political assassinations filled the letters that Catherine de' Medici sent to her daughter. Isabel read about the crumbling authority of her family, the chaos engulfing Paris, and the suffering of the French people. The kingdom of her childhood was dissolving into violence, and she could do nothing but grieve from afar. She never saw her mother or siblings again after leaving France. The emotional strain of permanent separation became a quiet, lifelong wound. Philip attempted to provide comfort, but his own burdens made it difficult for him to be present. His health continued to worsen. Chronic gout often left him bedridden. His digestive ailments caused severe episodes of pain. His brooding, introverted nature intensified under the weight of political crises. The more overwhelmed he became, the more solitary he grew. Isabel, longing for companionship and support, often found herself isolated behind the walls of the Escorial Palace, which Philip had designed as both a monument to his Catholic devotion and a fortress of royal authority. Its immense stone halls, cold interiors, and strict silences amplified the loneliness Isabel felt. Yet despite these hardships, Isabel's influence on the Spanish monarchy grew stronger. Her gentle, compassionate presence brought balance to Philip's rigid temperament. She acted as a mediator between factions within the court. She maintained correspondence with key French figures, offering small but significant diplomatic bridges between two countries on the edge of renewed conflict. She sponsored artists, musicians, and charitable works, helping to soften the severe cultural atmosphere of Philip's reign. Her daughters grew under her loving guidance, and observers noted how tender and affectionate she was as a mother, a striking contrast to many queens of her era. But the true turning point of Isabel's life, the moment where tragedy became inevitable, emerged with Philip's increasing reliance on her during the crisis of Don Carlos, his son and heir. Don Carlos, unstable in temperament and increasingly violent, became a political danger. His unpredictable behavior threatened the security of the empire. Tensions reached a breaking point when it was discovered that Don Carlos, perhaps in desperation or rebellion, had plotted to flee Spain and join the revolt in the Netherlands. The scandal shocked Europe. The court fractured over how to respond. Advisers advocated severe punishment, while others pushed for mercy. Isabel's position became impossibly delicate. She cared deeply for Don Carlos, who saw her with affection and perhaps idealized her purity and gentleness. She pleaded quietly for leniency, reminding Philip that the boy was unwell and needed compassion. But Philip, pressured by advisers and fearful for the stability of the empire, ordered Don Carlos imprisoned in January 1568. Isabel was forbidden from seeing him, though she tried to intervene in small ways behind the scenes. Don Carlos died in confinement 6 months later under mysterious circumstances, sparking rumors across Europe. Some claimed starvation. Others whispers of illness or deliberate poisoning circulated among ambassadors, though historians generally conclude he died from medical complications exacerbated by his confinement. The tragedy stunned the court. Isabel, already weakened by illness and stress, was devastated. She had tried to protect him, but had failed. The emotional shock crushed something within her spirit. Witnesses describe her as suddenly fragile, thinner, paler, and more subdued. Not long after, Isabel became pregnant again, but her body, worn down by repeated pregnancies, court pressures, and emotional trauma, could not bear the burden. In late 1568, she was struck by a violent fever. Physicians attempted treatments based on the limited medical understanding of the time. Bleedings, herbal draughts, and restrictive diets weakened her further. Philip, realizing the severity of her condition, rushed to her side. For days he remained near her bedside, abandoning affairs of state to care for her. His devotion in those final weeks revealed the depth of his affection. The fever did not subside. Isabel began experiencing complications related to her pregnancy. In early October 1568, at only 22 years old, she miscarried. The physical shock combined with the fever proved fatal. Within days, she slipped into unconsciousness. Philip held her hand as she died, surrounded by priests reciting prayers for her soul. The Spanish court plunged into mourning. France, already suffering its own tragedies, received news of her death with profound sorrow. Catherine de Medici, upon hearing the message, reportedly wept uncontrollably. The daughter she had sacrificed for peace had died far from home. Isabel's death marked the irrevocable turning point in the personal and political world of Philip II. He would never again enjoy the warmth she brought to his life or the balance she offered to his troubled reign. The death of Isabel de Valois in October 1568 marked not only the tragedy of a young queen whose life had been defined by duty and sacrifice, but also a profound turning point for both the Spanish and French monarchies. Her passing at the age of 22 left behind a void that resonated far beyond the walls of the Escorial Palace. It altered diplomatic balances, reshaped royal dynasties, influenced the trajectory of European politics, and left emotional scars that affected future generations. Though her life had been brief, its consequences were vast, and its impact endured long after her name faded from public memory. When Isabel died, Philip II was overwhelmed by grief. He had lost wives before, but the death of Isabel struck him with unusual force. Unlike his earlier politically arranged marriages, this union had brought genuine affection and emotional refuge. Observers at the Spanish court documented how he wept openly, something rare for a monarch known for his stoic composure. For days he isolated himself, refusing to attend council meetings or receive ambassadors. His court, normally governed by strict schedules and ceremonial discipline, halted in stunned silence. Bells rang across Madrid and throughout the kingdom, announcing the death of a queen beloved by the people. Churches held masses for her soul, and citizens mourned the loss of a woman whose presence had brought warmth, elegance, and compassion to a reign often associated with severity. But grief quickly collided with political reality. The absence of a male heir from Isabel shifted the balance of succession. Philip still had only one son, Don Carlos, whose death earlier that year had left the monarchy without a clear male successor. Spain faced the looming spectre of a dynastic crisis. To secure the future of the Habsburg Empire, Philip needed to marry again, despite still mourning Isabel's death. The political structure of Europe provided no room for prolonged personal sorrow. Within 2 years, he married Anna of Austria, his niece, in yet another dynastic alliance. This marriage eventually produced Philip's long-awaited male heir, the future Philip III. Yet even as the monarchy moved forward, the emotional marks of Isabel's death remained. For France, Isabel's death was a devastating blow. Catherine de Medici received the news during one of the darkest periods in French history. The French wars of religion were raging violently, and the fragile Valois dynasty was losing control of the kingdom. Isabel had been one of Catherine's most politically valuable children, a living tie to Spain that prevented open war between the two nations despite rising tensions. Her death removed a crucial diplomatic bridge. Without Isabel's influence moderating Philip's decisions, the relationship between France and Spain grew increasingly volatile. Spain began supporting hardline Catholic factions within France, fueling political divisions that escalated violence. The loss of Isabel thus contributed indirectly to the worsening chaos that would culminate in events like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. The tragedy of her short life also had a profound cultural impact. Throughout Spain and France, poets, ambassadors, chroniclers, and artists wrote about her passing with deep sorrow. Portraits of Isabel were commissioned or copied as symbols of innocence and lost potential. She became remembered as the queen who brought grace to a sombre court, and as the daughter sacrificed to the politics of empire. Several Spanish nobles lamented that her death had left the monarchy spiritually dimmer, noting that the warmth she introduced to the palace vanished with her. Her daughters, Isabel Clara Eugenia and Catalina Michaela, became the living legacies of their mother. Both inherited her intelligence, refinement, and diplomatic instinct. Raised under Philip's strict household yet shaped by the memory of their mother's gentleness, they grew into influential figures in their own right. Isabel Clara Eugenia, the elder, became one of the most powerful women in Europe. Entrusted with the governance of the Spanish Netherlands, she ruled with remarkable competence, bringing stability and a measure of peace to a region torn by conflict. Her leadership style reflected her mother's wisdom and emotional strength. Catalina Michaela, the younger, married into the House of Savoy and became a respected duchess known for her political acumen. Through these daughters, Isabel's legacy continued to influence European politics for decades. In Spain, the social and emotional atmosphere of the court changed noticeably after her death. Isabel had softened Philip's reign with her charm and kindness, balancing his introspective and often sombre disposition. Without her, the court drifted toward greater rigidity and religious intensity. Philip's already severe approach to governance hardened further, especially as he faced mounting political challenges. The revolt in the Netherlands demanded more extreme measures. Conflicts with England escalated. Tensions in the Mediterranean persisted due to Ottoman expansion. Isabel had often acted as an emotional and diplomatic stabilizer. Her absence left Philip more isolated, more hardened, and more immersed in the administrative burdens of empire. Historians note that Isabel's influence, though subtle, had helped prevent certain political decisions from spiraling into conflict. Her empathy and diplomatic instincts made her an informal advisor whose voice Philip trusted. After her death, his decision-making grew more rigid, and his political circle became narrower. Several chroniclers from the period mention that the king seemed to age rapidly after losing her, both emotionally and physically. The quiet spaces of the Escorial Palace, where Isabel had once moved with youthful brightness, now became associated with Philip's deepening solemnity and the increasing austerity of the Spanish court. Isabel's legacy extended beyond politics and family. She had a significant impact on Spanish culture, especially in the realms of fashion, art, and court etiquette. Her French elegance influenced the Spanish wardrobe and introduced new artistic trends. She patronized painters, musicians, and writers, encouraging a subtle blending of French and Spanish styles. After her death, several artists created posthumous portraits portraying her as a symbol of beauty, virtue, and fragility. These images circulated widely, especially in France, where her story had taken on romantic and tragic dimensions. Over time, the memory of Isabel de Valois transformed from a political figure into a symbolic one. In France, she became remembered as the princess taken too young from her homeland, sacrificed to secure peace in a war-torn continent. In Spain, she was remembered as the queen who brought a rare warmth to the cold grandeur of Habsburg ceremonial life. In both nations, she came to represent the human cost of dynastic politics, the tragedy of royal youth, and the complex emotional burdens carried by women in positions of immense but constrained influence. Her short life also shaped how future royal marriages were perceived. Isabel's suffering highlighted the dangers of forcing young girls into political unions before their bodies and minds were fully formed. While dynastic marriages continued, a greater awareness emerged regarding the health and emotional well-being of young queens. In certain courts, particularly in France, this shifted discussions about appropriate marriage ages for royal daughters. Though changes were gradual and inconsistent, Isabel's story became a cautionary example referenced by diplomats, chroniclers, and historians. Perhaps most importantly, Isabel's life revealed the fragile balance between political necessity and human vulnerability in the early modern world. She had been born into privilege, yet she lived a life shaped by forces she could not control. Her beauty and grace were admired, but they could not shield her from the emotional and physical demands of monarchy. She fulfilled her duty as a queen, a wife, a diplomat, and a mother, yet she paid for it with her health and her life. Her tragedy was not a dramatic scandal, but a slow, quiet erosion caused by expectation, responsibility, and sacrifice. In the end, Isabel de Valois stands in history as a figure whose life encapsulates the cost of royal politics. She was the child given to empire, the queen who brought peace, the mother of powerful daughters, and the woman whose death altered the emotional and political landscape of two kingdoms. Her story remains a reminder that behind the grand narratives of kings and wars are the deeply human lives of those whose destinies were shaped by powers far greater than themselves.